Thank you. My name's Lori Lamkin. I'm the Director of PM for Visual Studio Team Services. So what I'll do is kind of remind you, like it's been a lot of information, what have you heard? How to do this at large team scale, like how we did it culturally, where we are at Microsoft, our next steps, and then how to get the message out. And with likely all the other presentations, feel free to interrupt, interject, and everything.
Lori, it looked like you knew we were going to pick number 2. It's like a magician.
Guessed you were going to pick. I prepared number 2, but the number 1 I have always. Like I do it all the time, so I knew I could. It's up 2, but it's not. I know. Okay, so on this journey, what I find is that I go and we're not perfect. We didn't do this in 6 months, and we're not done. We had major milestones along the way, and the pattern that we followed is very similar to the pattern that I see other customers following. They start with, gosh, I want to reduce my cycle times. I want to do this DevOps thing. I want to move to that Cloud Cadence. My business isn't keeping up. So yes, that's why we changed too. What do you do first? Change your schedule. Like, you want to ship faster? Change your schedule, right? That's the first thing you do. So that's why Aaron went first, because that is the first step on the journey. And, to me, the big aha moments for this was, remember when we tried at first to change the schedule and we created a stabilization period because we were scared that we weren't going to have a stable product, and that delivered the wrong behavior where some teams did the right thing and burnt down their debt. Other teams kept building their debt because, of course, engineers want to ship features, so they're going to cram as many in as they can. And then Team A had to fix Team B's bugs. That was rewarding the wrong behavior. And the key to us was just jumping off the cliff, getting rid of the stabilization milestone. And then all of a sudden the system rewards the right behavior, because if you build up debt, then you have to spend sprints burning it down. It's just you. You don't get to ship your features until you do it. So that was kind of the key aha thing. The other thing is letting go. As a management team, there's a lot of security and planning up front and feeling like, we're going to hit these dates, but it's just false security. You've got to let your teams be able to run with their own backlogs, their own plans, and somehow find a way, to both align them. So there's a lot of things in this area that when I'm talking to executives, especially, it's about how we run our feature chats and our sprint demos. Those come across as big aha things, because they're like, can you just give me the KPIs so you can measure productivity? Can you just give me the KPIs so I know which teams are doing well or which ones need help or my features are on track? And again, you got to be in the product. You got to be talking to the people. The tools only facilitate that, but a conversation is way better, in that kind of transparent rhythm that Aaron went through. And the other is because you're always putting features out there, that schedule, it's not like, we do a 3-sprint plan and we try to stick to it. We're listening, we're learning, we're always doing that. So this is kind of how fast I'm going to go through what you went through this week. Yes?
So Lori, a lot of the times when we do this sort of conversation with customers, they're coming from we're coming from where we have a 12-month budget, and so now you're telling me that I can't really have a schedule and I can't put dates in. How does that translate to budgets and so on? How do you respond to that?
I've got a little bit about how we do that ourselves, because we also have a budget. We have the luxury of kind of having an ongoing project, which is a little different than some that have to be done at fiscal year boundaries. I call that commitment-based planning, where you kind of have a date and you want to know it goes there, that you're going to get stuff there. I tend to use the velocity portion of the backlog, where you can see what lines up in various sprints. Things change, and so it's a way. What you do is, like Aaron said, I wish I had his deck up, but what he said is, 18 months out, it's like a 60% chance. 6 months out, it's an 80% chance. Most people, if you are guaranteeing more than an 80% chance in a 6 month interval, you're lying. Even if you planned everything and thought of everything. So most people will accept those adjustments if you're being transparent with them about what they are along the way. But we have a fixed head count, a fixed resources, fixed vendors, and we have to make that work. And if it starts not working, then we're communicating with the people with the checkbooks and saying we need more. In fact, Brian did that like last November. He went to Satya, he did, and said, we're failing. We can't do this one ES thing. We just don't, and I think it's coming down to people want more than we can ever deliver. And we got a whole bunch of additional headcount because of that. So it does, but we had to be telling him along the way. And he's Brian. He makes magic happen, so there's that. Okay, so in the day in the life of the engineer, this Bill Essery talked about this. And the key moments for me were, as an engineer, you accrue debt as you're working in separate branches. And that debt is hidden to you until you try to do that integration. And the more teams that you have, the bigger that integration becomes. So how can you get that integration to happen in small chunks and faster, more continuously? And the key is work in master. Just take and this is one of the reasons why we moved to Git, because of the lightweight branching that it has, and it's not a big branch maintenance. But the really big benefit to our internal engineering was getting rid of that deep branch hierarchy, and I know Bill led a great discussion on that, but how much slowness that introduced and waste in the system it introduced. I don't know what I meant by walk the walk. I know what I meant by that. I meant use the tools that we build was a huge thing for us. But because as soon as we started, it's one investment reaping the benefits of all the things. And that's really part of our personal story, not necessarily something that customers can do themselves. But for us, it's really important that we have a release management system that we ship to everybody else, that we invest in, that we use ourselves, instead of something secondary that then siphons off a bunch of velocity from the team. Continuous deployment, I think, to me, this is, if you're not deploying frequently, the harder it is to deploy. If you have more time between deployments, more stuff piles up, it gets really difficult. All of a sudden the code isn't fresh in anyone's mind. So the same problem with the merge debt, you get, or integration debt, you get deployment debt. And these are very hidden things. So the more you can work in the smaller chunks, the easier the actual deployment will be. And I say to people on our journey, we avoided deploying because it was so hard, and that just made it harder. So we avoided deploying, so it made it harder. And so we avoided, and that just created, So reversing that it seems like it makes sense, but it's a little counterintuitive when you're in the middle of it. And by doing that, deploying more frequently, it actually made us prioritize making the tools we use to deploy more solid. And then, of course, debugging can't attach a debugger into a production machine, and all of a sudden we're flying blind. So then it became, we better instrument everything. And I'd say this is kind of the order of how we went about our DevOps journey. First the schedule and those learnings, then getting right into here, into a day in the life, and then, okay, our schedule's not so much the problem, but we can't deploy on time, we can't stabilize on time, and it's because of these sorts of issues, the integration debt, the deployment debt that we needed to work on. It's working for people? Good. Okay, see some nods? Okay, then we saw quality and testing. And the big key here was, we're moving slowly. Why? Because, I wrote all my code, but that guy over there can't seem to test it in time. Really easy to throw things over the fence. To actually make a change, the big key was changing the accountability. I don't know how to live in a world where devs aren't accountable for tests. We were in a nightmare situation where tests that testers run were different than tests that developers ran. And they, so you didn't even know what was going to be tested. And by the time they got around to testing it, it's like, I wrote that code so long ago, I can't even remember how to fix it. So, that key pivot, making dev accountable for the whole thing, made everything change. It made the test tools get better. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a bit more on the test accountability, because the story makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you tell that story to managers or senior management, and you say, okay, you have this whole bunch of manual testers.
Yep.
And they need to rescholar. They need to learn to develop.
Yes.
The reaction is not all that positive.
Yeah.
And how do you convince, and how can you make that switch?
Well, I feel like the way I do that is I go in and say the state that we were in. We had manual testers and we had automated testers as well. They were writing functional tests. And we, at one point, got rid of all of our manual testers and just had functional testers, because we said if you get 100% code coverage, who needs manual tests? And then we found out that was a really bad idea, because nobody's looking at the product and not everything can, nobody's got the visual on what's going on. So we backed off of that, and then we had this nightmare of tests that were functional tests. And Munil talked about how we were finding tests in dark corners of the office that we didn't even know about, and that's because of that legacy of that 100% code coverage drive that we had. And what we found, if you're relying on manual testing, that's a little different story than relying on functional testing. As for us, it was, we can't have all these manual testers. We need to automate as much as possible. And then, oh no, we can automate a lot, but we need to reserve some manual testers. And the next step on our journey was, if we treat these people as second-class citizens and their tools as second-class tools, and their timeline for getting to actually performing the test function is so far afterward, we're slowing down the machine. So it's really, if you can afford that sort of waste in your system, then fine. But for us, it was a huge speed increase as soon as devs took that accountability. Everything got better. The tests got better. The test tools got better. The test results got better. And like Munil was saying, that this isn't my latest deck, I just realized, but this is, or maybe it is, but what am I trying to say? The signal to noise, or the quick, fast, reliable signal that you get from when you're trying to do a pull request, and when you get the CI runs and all that, and making sure the red isn't just, oh, it's always red, forget about it. That only happened when we made dev accountable for the test, and not dev with some testers working for dev. We tried that too. It was really devs doing the testing. So, other businesses, I agree, they might make a different choice, but as soon as you start throwing things around and you have all these handoffs, you're creating time and waste in the system, and the business is operating way too fast. Like, I don't know about you guys, but we can't ship fast enough. So that's how I talk about it.
Martin?
Yes, Martin.
You're a reasonably technical person.
Okay. You could say that. They want you to use the microphone.
I think I'm using the microphone.
Okay.
Lean forward.
Lean forward.
There we go. See, now it's on. So the things that you're talking about just now, and the way that you're talking about them, are not the way that product owners
Yes.
that I work with in most organizations
Yes.
are able to talk about things and understand things.
Yes.
And I think that's definitely an indication of the business that you're in. So the direction you're talking about is you guys understand all of those things, because your deep domain knowledge is building tools that support those things.
Yes.
However, most of the businesses that I work with have no clue really what CI is. They have no clue what unit tests are. They have no clue what the difference between a unit test and a functional test is.
Yes.
And I've been in organizations where engineering teams have redefined the meaning of the word unit test in order to satisfy the demand that management has that they have unit tests.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how, when you're talking to customers, are you generally talking to the technical side of things? And if so, how do you bring in the product and program management, and how do you have an effective conversation with them when, in effect, you're having a different conversation with them than they might have?
Yeah, the people that I normally talk to are the executives or the engineering leaders, because think about it, that's the business I'm in. It's people who are trying to make a culture change in their organization and are going to talk about buying tools or standardizing tools for their organization as part of that overall culture change, or it's the dev manager who wants to buy, is interested in VSTS, and so I have to go deeper on that sort of stuff. So what I'm doing right now is not how I would talk to executives about it. The way, and I'll talk about that a little bit, I think, after I get through the recap. But what I talk to the executives about is we need to move faster. We need to, the speed of business isn't keeping pace with what the customer demands are, what the market demands are. We need to move faster. That's not just doing the same thing we did in shorter sprints. It means working differently. It means adopting new ways of working. And then I say, here's the story that we went through. And I talk about first we went to Agile, and the executives eat up the Agile section. Like, they're going to go and talking about managing Scrums through feature chats and looking at productivity through sprint mail, kind of that's their. I spend most of the time on that, and a little bit on Jeff's running the business on metrics, a little bit of that. When I'm talking to an engineering manager, then all of this hits them really hard. So right now I'm kind of recapping the high-level lessons, but you have to tune it for who you're talking to. There's a lot of great lessons in the culture change here when you're talking to an exec. So the Agile section, but also I'd say this is a reorg. This is changing your dev and test roles and responsibilities. And the same thing for the ops section. It's changing your dev and ops roles and responsibilities. Those are vital things to being in the DevOps world. You can't do it by throwing things over the fence. And a lot of people don't have control over that, but you've got to figure out a way that when you're talking to the executives, they tend to be able to have some control over that. Does that answer a little bit?
Mostly, yes.
Yeah, mostly.
Well, because I talk to executives as well, and I understand that difference. I have a big customer at the moment that don't even do any software, so that's an interesting conversation too. But it's getting the executives, depending on the size of the company, do kind of need to understand some of the things, because they're trying to use the terminology. They're trying to make sure that folks on their team understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing. I don't mean in the detail, but at least at the conceptual level, that we need to be running automation, not manual.
Yeah.
But I find it really difficult to have that conversation at the executive level, because they're missing fundamental pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, to me, again, I'm coming in a little different way, where I'm not saying you have to change how you run your whole business. I'm saying we had to change the way we ran ours, and I think as consultants, you can say, I have observed, many large organizations go through this. Microsoft took 2-3 days to walk me through the pains and the mistakes that they made along this way as well. And if, I'm telling you now that if engineering is responsible for the end-to-end, you can move faster. Magic happens where tools, processes, systems, the right choices on balance of manual versus what kinds of testing practices will start to come together. And it does. So, Adam.
Laurie, I think most people will get it, that it's better for their company if the engineers own the code and the tests, and the tests are closer to the code, etc. And that graph is pretty awesome. I think you look at that and you go, yeah, I concur with that. But then the second step is, well, all the testers, they're going to turn into developers. And most companies I know would say those testers are not good enough to write code.
That's right. That happened to us too.
Yeah.
And did Munel talk about that at all?
You had a door as well.
Yeah, and it's an investment in having more engineers and the less technical people, who aren't be able to step up to that are going to, have to. They get laid off. It's tough. It was really tough. And we had devs that didn't want to do testing and just were kind of overly, that's not my job, and couldn't adapt. And they fell out, bad performance reviews and managed out as well. So it is a changing the way you work, and it requires all that kind of HR systems and management support to go with that. Good. So where am I? Yeah, so I was talking about, I do think the magic here is moving that test accountability. And then but even when we did that, it took a while to figure out the specifics. And these are kind of the specifics, which was, let's have the same tests run everywhere, including production. That's kind of my last point. Let's make sure that signal ratio, we get tests can be run quickly. They're run close to the code. 55,000 tests in 6 minutes. Yeah, that's what we're talking about here. So that every time you're submitting a pull request, it's good. Then the rolling build running more. And then things that are out of your daily workflow, so you can still run fast, are running in production, so that we're making sure that we've got quality throughout. And then there's the zero tolerance for flaky tests. That finally came to be. It took us a long time to get there. I saw Buck sending mail all the time, whining about this NAR pass not going and all that kind of stuff. But, the thing was that that whole test quarantine and making sure that, we're only, we're putting on the backlog things that need to be done to clean up the system, but we're not slogging down the system. All of that kind of fell out because we cared, and we realized if we don't catch the quality issues at the pull request time in a fast and speedy way, then it slows down. It was the slowest part of our whole system once we got rid of the schedule and the merge debt problem. And then, Buck talked about this a lot, and I think the key thing here was we had to evolve in flight, and he talked about much of the things that we did do and why we took one at a time. But we can't just do architecture improvements. It wasn't like we were shipping the product and shipping features to all of our customers all the time. And so there's a balance between kind of what Buck is saying he wants to do and what I'm saying we can do in terms of our feature backlog. So that's just our two roles kind of playing against each other in a natural, healthy tension most of the time. But he had to do this while the plane was flying. And so he had a lot of good specific technical tips on what you can do to help people with their cloud architecture. For us ourselves, what I see is that feature flag saves lives. That was a huge thing for us, because once we started deploying all the time, we had a bunch of people on the team saying, my feature can't be done in 3 weeks, so I'm not going to merge and I'm not going to deploy. And that meant they're in a branch in isolation over there. And what that meant is that they're accruing merge integration debt, and they're accruing deployment debt because they haven't deployed in forever. And so when they deploy, it's going to be super hard, and we're all going to be brought down with them. And our deployment's not going to take 3 days. It's going to take 3 weeks. And then everybody else didn't deploy again, and now they brought the whole team down. So we had that happening. And the answer to that was feature flags, which is controlled exposure. Just turn it off, and you get to deploy, you get to merge, you get to do all those things. Not in that order. You merge first, then you deploy. But, you get to do all those things. You don't accrue that. So this is all about that kind of speed of the machine gets to keep going, and I'm not accruing debt. I'm keeping people honest throughout the whole thing. And then when we turn it on, then customers can see it. But you get to do it on not the deployment schedule, but on the schedule and the exposure level that your feature is ready for. And then, of course, we had our on-prem architecture up there, and we had to prevent the cascading failure problem, which, we found in single points of failure and kind of eliminating those piece by piece, of which we're still in the process of doing now, but learning how to make sure people aren't misusing resources and things like that. So that's kind of that's a much deeper conversation, you're talking to the architect about. But if you're talking to the exec, I would say, the big thing I always hit on is the feature flags thing, because that's the resistance, is people saying, I can't possibly do a feature in 3 weeks, and that's the answer. And then security is a really hard problem. Oh yeah, go ahead.
It's maybe a weird question, but at what point do you remove the actual reference to the flag in the config, or do you actually never get rid of it?
Somebody just asked me that. Like Siemens just asked me that this morning. I don't know the answer. Do we have any engineers from our team here?
I think we got an answer for the
Anybody have the answer?
We do remove it, Laurie.
You do remove it.
We do remove it. We wait for the time period generally about 2 sprints, then we actually remove it. There are certain microphone habit for a long time.
I got it. So the question was, hey, after you turn the feature flag off and everybody has it, do you go and remove all the code, the old code path and the feature flag? And I didn't know the answer, but Ravi said, yes, we absolutely do that as part of the cleanup after the last ring exposure of the feature flag. So now I know the answer. Thank you. Okay, security. So the big thing here is there's a lot of process and formality and all that around security, and everybody really is, this is a really important topic for people. And the thing that, this is a culture change problem that Buck talked about, which is, let's just make it real and make it personal, and then you're going to care. Because it's like, okay, I got into your code, and I turned your whole dialogue upside down. And it's like, wait a minute, that you can't do that to my code, so I'm going to, start. So he created that kind of culture and dynamic through that red team, blue team exercises that we do, where people take pride in hacking into each other's code or not being able to, and so that kind of instilled that secure code culture that it's a lot different than, threat model is important, but it's really that thinking and that mindset that counts a heck of a lot more. And we can't plan for every vector that people can attack us on. But what we can do is assume that there's going to be a breach and plan how fast we can react to that breach. And so a lot of the security work has been around that for our team. And then lastly, humans make mistakes. They store passwords on file shares, and we can tell them not to, and we can send them to security training, and we can do all these sorts of things. And then we run another red-blue exercise, and we find a bunch of passwords on the file share. It's just like people. And many people learn, but nobody will ever always learn. So you can have all the sorts of lists of best practices, but unless you're kind of making that real, and you have to assume that people are going to make mistakes. You have to go and check that they're being followed and that you have ways to test that through. And this is the same learnings as the testing problem to me. At a high level, it's make deployment the engineering team's problem, make live site the engineering team's problem. That was huge for us because in the past, I could go deploy something, sleep all night, have a nice weekend, come back Monday to 900 customer issues that the customer support team was dealing with and the ops team was trying to solve and all that sort of stuff. And hey, I didn't pay the price. All these other people paid the price. And if I don't pay the price, then I'm not incented to build in all the systems to never get to that point again. But when I'm called at 2 a.m, oh yeah, I'm going to make sure that live site remediation item gets in there so that I never, encounter that sort of problem again. And it also incents, you say, hey, we deploy every 3 weeks and the developers are in charge of testing. Well, if they weren't in charge of live site, we could have things that weren't tested or weren't tested well go into production. And then who would pay the price? It's like, again, the devs do. So they go, oh, I had a bug in my code. Oh, I didn't write good enough tests. So I'm going to learn to do that better next time. And I'm motivated to learn because it hits me where it matters. I'm the one who's accountable. So that sort of accountability was huge for us. And it helped people then do things like stay green throughout the sprint, follow the safe deployment practices. These are all motherhood and apple pie, but unless you actually have the team motivated to do that, and accountability does that really well, then you get that. The first point is really about that the point I made earlier. Also, small chunks frequently make it easier to diagnose, make it easier to do it more frequently. So I talked a little bit about this. Again, engineering accountability, that's kind of thematically what we're talking about. We also look at, there was a culture change around LiveSite being most important. We were very lucky in team services because we had a very customer-focused culture. And so we really care and reach out and have lots of different customer programs and interactions like we have here right now. But we had to build on that and say, no, stop everything. LiveSite is the most important thing that we do. It's the customer experience that they have right now, and it's not just a tax or something like that. It's actually something people count on for us, and we take pride in. It's a feature of our product. It's something that differentiates us. And in order to survive in that world, we needed great alerting systems. And so, having unactionable alerts, having redundant alerts, getting overwhelmed by alerts meant we ignored all the alerts. And then we have customers coming to us. And so, it incented us to go and say, we better clean up this whole alert thing because it's gold. This is the key to making sure we're jumping on our customers' issues and the right customers' issues and being able to do it as quickly as we can. And then creating systems that can fail over, self-heal, like all of a sudden, not only are we getting the alerts, but we can deal with it in the morning, not all night. And all of that wouldn't have happened if we just had an ops team on the side that we threw things over the wall to. It was because the dev team is sitting there. They're fighting to balance these improvements as a part of not just feature velocity, but engineering improvement velocity on the team. And then lastly, Jeff gave a session on running the business on metrics. And we had a lot, the company about 3 years ago said, we want to have a data-driven culture or something like that, and it's like, oh, that sounds great. I want to be data-driven. Don't we all want to be data-driven? And then it's kind of, what does that mean? How do we become data-driven? And so, we had already started just being in the cloud, learning that we can't debug things, that we needed a lot of telemetry and analytics, logging and all that sort of stuff. So that was what was most important to us, was our health of our service. But then to change the culture and say, we need to do this in all aspects of our decision making, we were very good, always can get better at the kind of qualitative feedback loops, but not very good at the quantitative feedback loops. And so I learned a couple of things through that journey. The first one was, designing metrics is as hard as designing features. I better not just say, oh, here's a metric, this is our success metrics, we want engaged users. No, we redefined what engaged users on the service meant, 3 or 4 times in the first year and a half of measuring it. And as we just learned that, some months have different days than others, and if we don't normalize that, then it looks like things are going like this when they're really quite flat. Just things like that you learn. I don't need to measure vanity metrics. Everything's always going up. I need to measure the velocity ramp instead. Is the velocity going up, or is it just staying the same? So we learned a lot about that. And even now, every time we define a metric, we have a conversation like I would do a spec review. It's like, what is it, and what does it mean, and what are we trying to drive, and are there sub-metrics we should be watching to make sure it's right? I didn't expect that much kind of overhead as a part of, let's be data-driven, but it helped make sure that we were designing the right input, or designing the right output that made the input change, I guess. And then lastly, we had to bake it into our culture, which was, and Jeff showed you, we have a monthly service review. Brian's there, so he can say it's important, and he can make sure people know we value this, and he's asking all sorts of questions. We bake it into, our reviews up to Scott Guthrie, our executive vice president. We go and tell him every 6 weeks how we're doing on health, our business, our scenarios, our customer telemetry. So, we're going and kind of reporting on that and discussing it with these executives, and then bringing it down to the teams, using those same engaged user metrics and saying, what does that mean for your feature? How many people are using work item tracking? How many people are using the, social features of work item tracking? So people all through the org could kind of say, oh, I don't just ship the feature, but now I go and look and see, are people using it, or did I do this for not? Or do I need to make adjustments to the backlog to say, oh, I need to change. We need to work on this feature more to make it achieve its goals. So that was what you heard in the last 3 days. So those are kind of the key takeaways. And thematically throughout all of this is it wasn't a straight line to get from A to B, nor is B the end. It's a journey of continuous evolution and mistakes and learnings that we're still on. And yeah, no rainbows and unicorns. And really key to that whole thing wasn't just, go, get rid of your L3 tests, or, those are nice little tidbits, but really it's kind of that accountability, that ownership, the rhythm of how your business works and what your leaders are saying, and what meetings they're going to and what mails they're reading, and how they're interacting with the team to help steer that change. Let's see. I have a section on kind of why, maybe a little bit more culturally about how this helped us, like how we make a strategy change on our team. And is this interesting to you? Because I think this might, okay, I'm just checking. All right. So I'm going to start with the old grumpy way that we used to do planning in developer division. I don't know when Dev 11 was. I'm sure it was in 2010. We have really great ways of organizing our names and our code names with our product years that we ship, but it was probably in 2010 or 2012. I can guarantee it wasn't in 2011. We had a pre-planning phase, a planning phase, and then we'd start development. And we had a set of memos and documents that came about through this. And you can see, look how long this is. This is a real slide from our division planning, where we had September 2009 and a vision document in April 2010. And then, then we'd write that later, when, a year later, whenever it was at that point in time. And you just think, yeah, if you're planning 2 years worth of stuff, it takes 4 months to plan it. Yeah, that's part of the problem. But another part of the problem was the sort of activities that we needed to do to bring the team along at the beginning were very, a lot of overhead in that. And so part of being better at making strategy shifts is making sure the team has all the information they need on a continuous basis. And that's kind of the theme of what I'm going to tell you now. The first is customer connection. Does the team know their customers on an ongoing basis? Because if they don't, when I get up and say, we're going to make this change because customers want it, doesn't mean anything to people. You need to go bring in an army of customers, and you need to prove to them that customers want it. And then they'll say, okay, maybe she has a point. But if I'm trying to create, these are like a bunch of ways that my team engages with customers. And by my team, I mean Brian's team, really. Like, it's not just the PMs, it's the engineers as well. So, we have all these different top customer, handheld sort of programs where individuals on the team sponsor our top accounts and call them once a month. We have our group of MVPs, of which many of you are here. We have calls. We have that alias that I can never read because there's so much activity on it. But we have people going at events, EBCs, all that sort of thing. So we try to create many channels which our team can engage in. We have owners for these different channels, and we try to recruit engineers, PMs, etc. As PMs, you can't do your job unless you have engagement here. And there's lots of ways to do that. You don't have to be on stage at events all the time and be really good at presentations and be on the event circuit, you can be on Twitter. Like you can figure this out. You can do what's natural to you. Twitter isn't natural to me, so I tend to be someone who's doing a lot of exec presentations is where I'm doing a lot of the engagement. But this is kind of like, what's important is that this isn't a big bring the team up to speed on what customers want that happens before planning. This is something that we continually do. And we have a VSTS customer reports alias where all of this information is sent. Someone goes to the Atlassian conference and learns something about what our competition is doing or how they're trying to get Jira to work with our CI/CD system. They send out a summary of that to our customer reports alias. It has our entire team on it. It has a bunch of other people interested as well. I try when I do EBCs to send my own summaries around, but it's like we try to keep feeding that learning. So even people who aren't attending are seeing all of the customer activity and the learnings as they come through. And this is just, just by providing that alias, because Microsoft works in aliases, that's what we do is we use Outlook and we email ourselves. There might be other better ways like Slack channels or some other ways that you choose, but for us that was kind of bringing customer data, qualitative customer data into our natural way of working so everybody could have access to it. And then opening up the channels so that anybody can engage. Also what was important, so just like the customer thing was all these other things. So we'd have that pre-planning period I told you about. We would educate people on customers. We'd educate them on the competition. We would educate them on how we're doing on the business goals. We would, here's all the things that are important to our business. And so now it's like we're always planning. We're always setting this context with the team. This is an example of a competitive review that we did. What we do is probably once every 4 months, we have a set of competitive reviews where it's not like, this is a part of it. Yeah, here's our different elements we have in our solution and where we think we are now and where we think we'll be. That's a part of it. The meat of it is we do a pitch. We have someone do our pitch, and we have someone on the team do the competition's pitch. And we both do this demo, like we're the field guy, kind of doing the sell. And we come in, and the team votes on which one they would buy in the room. So it gets really competitive and kind of fun between the people doing the pitch. They kind of bring each other down, and it's kind of a fun thing. But it's everybody on the team gets to see, where we're ahead, where we're behind, and how it matters to the people making the decision, because they're kind of put into that seat of making the decision on what they want. So for a product that's in the market versus an IT tool, that works really well. But the big learning here is kind of keeping that competition angle fresh in people's mind and a little personal so they can see what it means. And then we have a bunch of ways to communicate to the team. We have all these different exec reviews. We have feedback. Like I gave a presentation, 2 exec presentations to the SLT this summer, which is Satya's leadership team. This summer, I send full-on summaries to the team. I go do a Gartner consult last week. Summary goes to the team. Like, just keep, we have a lot of mail, but they have the context to understand why, what we're faced with, what our challenges are, what we're doing well at, ongoing. And then we try to keep the team up to date with a weekly strategy meeting, so all of the key decision makers on the team, who are essentially me, Buck, and Munil, and our directs, get together and we talk about key pivots or key concerns or the latest satisfaction survey that we got from all of you using the service, and what was good and what was bad. And so all of this stuff is coming together to feed into those planning periods that we do a couple times a year. But it also helps us so that when Brian goes and suddenly gets 80 more headcount for our team from Satya, not during a planning period, that I can do a little bit of planning, a little bit on a dime, because the context is already set amongst the team. Because a lot of resources added to the team means we got to do a quick replan, right? So we can, we're kind of teed up to be able to do that at any time. And then, communicating to the team, all hands. And then each of my directs holds their own all hands as well, many times a year, to just make sure people are up to speed. So, are you guys all reading like exact details of this competitive result? Yeah, you're like, what product was that you're talking about? Yeah, be careful what you put on the slide. And then budgeting. Budgeting in Microsoft happens once a year, unless something unusual happens, like your boss goes and gets more resources for you. It happens, it usually starts in the April timeframe, and you are supposed to get a new budget in July, because that's when it starts. Often we won't actually see that until about now. So that's always an interesting thing. We do some long-range planning. Long-range planning is a big dart-throwing exercise as far as I'm concerned. They look at the velocity of our current revenue and they say, oh, well, what's changing? And you say, I'm coming out with this new product. It's going to make $1 gazillion. And okay, we'll bump that up. And the field comes back and says, I'll never be able to sell your stuff. It's too hard. And then they bump it down. And, so it's a big kind of back and forth sort of negotiation, I guess. And we look at, developer usage stats and trends of developer population growth, and a bunch of theoretical things come into this forecast. And that informs the budget, and it tells us, okay, are we a year where we need to tighten our belts, or are we a year where, we're going to get some more resources or whatever. It all that black magic hocus pocus stuff, of which comes into headcount, vendor money, hardware. Like that's what we get, and so that's the currency that we operate in at Microsoft. And so if I don't have a continual conversation going with my executive vice president, we could see some big surprises coming in our headcount adjustments. And that's an incredibly painful thing to deal with. So that becomes that's why a lot of that pillar review and executive cadence is so important, so that you know the challenges you're up against and whatnot. So that's just a little kind of background, because I know a lot of people were asking some stuff like that in Aaron's section. There's a way that I take that, down to the team, so then we have headcount, we have resources, so that's good. But, we always have more things to do when we can. We always have more customers asking me for more stuff, and that's great. And we have advocates within the team watching different various parts of the industry, saying we need to pay more attention to security as part of the CI/CD cycle, or, coming and saying we've ignored YAML too long, and, that just advocating for things. And, there's just, I think every organization goes through the planning magic where these, go investigate that. Tell me what that would mean. Come back and tell me what your proposal would mean, and just conversations and sharing. We're going through that right now, actually, for our fall planning period, and so we have 5 or 6 different topics that we're considering. Should we double down on social? Should we, do more in terms of public, anonymous access and things like that? So we're kind of back and forth going, okay, where do we want to put most of our wood behind which arrow? And all of it needs to drive people to Azure, because that's our core business goal right now. But that's kind of like a series of conversations. And also inputting into any sort of strategy change is things like, we want to be a data-driven organization, or we don't think we're customer-focused enough, or, how are we going to get better at having a live site culture? So those input as well. Along with July, we set our business goals once a year. Jeff shared those with you. We have 3 that we watch. It is another dart-throwing exercise. How do I know what that satisfaction is going to go up 5 points or 10 points or 0? It's a little bit of a, what velocity trend are we on, and what do we think we're doing that's going to help it? And then we just set a target and we watch it. And we've had years where we set too aggressive goals and beat ourselves up all year long. And we've had years where we set a goal and 2 months later we blew right past it. So we reset the goal when we blow past it, but when we don't meet it, we just beat ourselves up. That's kind of how we work. Then I put an example of our cross-team priorities spreadsheet, which I'm sure especially our MVPs will be very interested in looking at. But it kind of talks about, it's my attempt to say that of all the things we need to do across all the teams and all of VSTS, what is most important? So, accessibility was something that we made a big push on. It was a company-wide objective, so that came up as top of the list. We had a deadline for that. secrets rotation, no single point of failure, data import, org support, like we kind of go containerized. So it's a mixture of kind of the engineering improvements that we want, as well as kind of the platform level improvements that compete with that. And this is kind of the tool that we use to get the key leaders in the organization on the same page in terms of as we're resourcing things, these are the things that we want to see. And I translate that into a headcount spreadsheet. So we fund teams, and we say, you had 50 people last year, you get 52 people this year. You had 50 people last year, you get 48 this year. So we kind of do that based on these priorities. We need to go faster here. We think we can take it from there. That's kind of, you don't have a day to meet those targets, obviously. But that feeds into that yellow sticky exercise that Aaron went through, where teams are able to kind of choose where they want to be. And so that's kind of the higher level information to say how many slots do we really have available on each team. And I really stop that at the M2 level. I don't go and plan every single feature team. I say that M2 level gets 50 people. That's 4 feature teams, 5. It's up to them. They get to kind of decide that sort of stuff, that autonomy alignment thing. And then all of that starts funneling into exactly what Aaron talked about, which was, that's the strategy part. That's what we focus on. Then we start reviewing those priorities, like what is social going to look like? Let's see a storyboard. Let's have a document. Let's talk about it. Let's have reviews on the epics, funneling into yellow stickies and all that feature chats and all hands, and starts getting that kind of transparent, iterative conversation going that leads into our execution. So, questions on that? That was just to kind of give a little background on how we take that to strategy. The other thing is that we've shown you what we measure. We've shown you this is our debt and scorecarding. A lot of people ask about how do you know which teams are productive? How do you reward your people? Those sorts of questions. And I don't really do a lot of that through metrics. We absolutely do. I'm not looking at team by team how their burn down is, their exact feature velocity in comparison with other teams. It's tempting, it seems like a good thing. But the reality to me are those sprint demos and those feature chats. Because if I go in and I say, I look at a demo and I say, oh, they're working, I can see a really hard problem someone's working on, or I could see a little tiny improvement someone's working on. That still counts as one feature. One feature team may have called that 10 story points, and the other called it 10 story points, because that's the way the currency of the feature team. But one was a lot harder to deliver than the other. And so by looking at the features, looking at the product, I can see the value that the teams are delivering. Any KPI or metric isn't going to give me that. And any course corrections that I do in sort of a metric level setting or something like that is way better in a conversation, which is why those feature chats are so valuable to me. I see what feature teams are planning for the next 3 sprints, and I go, when are they ever going to be done with that? They've been working on that forever. And I can ask, hey, are we going to be done with that sometime soon? And they say, here's why it's so hard. Here's what's happening. Or no, we've been bogged down by the live site debt. We've been so busy with that, we haven't even gotten to that. It's like, oh, well, maybe you should plan for work for what you need to do there. So it becomes a nice conversation there. But rewarding people and all of that, these are all inputs into that, but there's not like a set of productivity metrics that we look at the individual or the team level. It's all a very subjective conversation that we're having throughout that says, why is that so hard to deliver? Or, wow, you're getting a lot of stuff done there. So, yeah.
So do you get any pushback when you actually say that? Because if you look at a lot of companies, that's what they do. They watch in metrics, right?
That's
and
right.
They're trying to manage, based on those metrics.
That's right.
So do you get any pushback on that when you say it, and how?
That's a great question. The big aha moment for people is looking at the product, the actual product deliverable. Because you could be in your clipboard, or you could be in the product. We have both. But if you live in just the clipboard world, there's so many ways to game those metrics that you're going to get the wrong result. And I say that, and execs nod every time. They're like, I know, I tried it, yeah, and I thought you had the magic answer, and I'm like, nope.
So just follow up on that.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about this? So like for customers who are very large, right? I mean, so you're talking about, probably they're overlooking a lot of products, so they don't have probably time to be involved. Because what you're saying is you are actually involved. Like you're looking at the product itself, and you're kind of, this is how you're gauging that, whether people are doing what they're supposed to do, or like as you mentioned. So what about, those companies who's got those executives that they just don't have time, they don't have the,
Yeah, then I feel like, if you're at a point where you don't have time, which, I would think my boss would be at a point where he doesn't I don't know how he finds the time, but he does. You got to find your captains that do have the time, that are doing that you trust and value, because they're the ones that are going to tell you what it's about. You're just too high up in the organization to be able to pay attention to the product, or the products. So you have to have people who tell you how those products are doing. Yeah.
So if you're not looking at those metrics, are the teams looking at them at all, or are they not being graded on those, or whatever, however you want to say that?
Well, I think the teams definitely look at team capacity, because they're planning their sprint and they're saying this is how much we've got, and so, I need to fill that up. And they definitely look at team burn down, because they're trying to burn it all down by the end of the sprint. That's a little bit more of the autonomy thing that Aaron was talking about. Team velocity, the way they use that is when they plan their next sprint, they go, oops, we overestimated how much we could get done. Let's get it right this next time. But I'm not looking at any of that. And that's not taken down to the individual level.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So to follow up on that then, how are those teams empowered to, I guess, self-motivate themselves or challenge themselves on their own metrics if they know that you or others aren't looking at them?
How are they motivated to get more work done? Is that kind of the question?
I guess is what I'm saying.
Developers like to ship features to customers. And they don't like to be woken up in the middle of the night, and that's kind of the two things that we have. So you're going to tell me not all developers want to do that?
No, I will
okay, you were kind of looking at me skeptical, so I was trying to read you. Okay.
So the challenge I have is when I'm talking to executives, there's going to be the question of, I'm going to come and say, that team's not performing, and I think maybe we should get rid of them, right? Yeah. Then that's directed to you, what is your response then?
Yeah. Happens. Yeah. So I think, let me make sure I understand, because there are reasons why teams don't perform. A team's just dragged down in debt forever, and they never get out, and they don't have a plan, and they can't get out. And usually that's not a PM problem, it's an engineering problem. So Buck and Munil are going, and it's really often ends up being they have a struggling lead, on the ground that can't. So they coach and help, and sometimes they have to manage those people out, and get a new lead. And that's part of just managing the organization. How do they tell they're struggling? Yes, the debt. Yes, those feature chats. What? You guys, what's taking you so long? Why is this so hard? If they're in there and they're going, oh, yeah, this is really hard, tons of dependencies, really hard problem, breaking down the whole system, then it's actually, this is the velocity we should expect. So they help set expectations across the team.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay?
Sorry, now
go ahead.
You have another question. So we're talking about the leads on those teams now, and we had I forget who it was, and I presented the thing where you guys kind of pick the teams. They kind of have to sell their own teams, and they kind of pick.
Yep.
At what level do you guys what is the approach you guys take to kind of determine that and make the leads kind of responsible for that team's success? Is it at that point where no, there's a reason why nobody seems to want to go on that specific team, or is it a different approach?
Those are all very good clues. If nobody wants to go on the team, it might be we didn't make the charter of the team exciting enough. That's a problem. And so we can actually adjust that, and have adjusted that in yellow stickies before. It could be because they don't want to work for that lead. And this is why the yellow sticky exercise, you have 3 choices. Not everybody gets their first choice. And if you don't get your first choice, there's a conversation. It's not just a placement. It's okay, so why and what, and are you okay with, and all that. And so it's a white glove treatment of placing people and getting feedback on our managers is a part of that. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to.
So how is the relationship you have between the product management and the engineering team? So do you get in a situation when the engineering team is feeling that you're pushing too much, like the product management is pushing too much on them, or like? Do you
Well, this is awesome because none of them are here in the room, so I can say I'm perfect. I never push too hard. I always see the big picture. No, of course, Buck and I especially have nice knockdown, drag-out fights over it, and it's great. Like he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I try to, but I feel like it's the healthy tension of part of it. And he's, we're both collaborative people, and we both are looking out for our customers and our team. So we're open to each other's opinion, and that is part of our culture. Is leaders don't know it all. We're transparent out in front of people. We care about customers and we care about results. The rest of it, it's kind of like, that's the core of who we are, and that's how our leaders behave, which makes it nice. It's nice to collaborate. So you're going to ask.
So, what's Dwayne? So, something that Dwayne's question, made me think about is that, from what I remember talking to Bill and Esri and the others, at least, during the presentation and afterwards. The way I see is that all those metrics, they're relevant because there is something called the team, and the team kind of there is a peer pressure for quality. I mean, they like what they're doing. They're following, those agile tenets, of a 40-hour work week, and quality is something that you're working for quality. You're not working for a carrot on top at the tip of a stick or anything like that. Meaning, all those metrics that you're referring to, I think of them as coming from top-down metrics. Meaning, if a developer actually works in terms of satisfying a manager instead of satisfying the professional what they're doing, right? They would be thinking about those metrics. Gotta minimize the number of bugs and etc. And from what I could gather, and I actually talked to Bill about this, is that no, people here are self-managing in the sense that if somebody in the team is not performing, the team peers will tell them, hey, come on, right? Pull your weight, do more, or how can we play together to do more, to be happier? And as far as I know, Microsoft is doing the real agile thing as opposed to what other companies are kind of faking it by imposing top-down metrics that at the end of the day is another, the old carrot and stick thing.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really awesome. I'm sure it doesn't always work that way. First of all, we let teams run autonomously, so it's not a consistent culture on our team or in the company, and different teams at Microsoft are definitely at different levels in that journey. And I've worked with teams at Microsoft that have said, the team comes up with a plan and the manager says, you didn't hit the date, replan. What can I cut? Nothing. Just replan. It's all over the place. And at Microsoft, we're all in different areas. And I would think that there's plenty of times where people are on a team and feel uncomfortable saying you're not pulling your weight and stuff like that. But that would be ideal.
But in the SS, that's more of an exception than the rule, right?
Yeah, we have that transparency thing that we have is a transparency and feedback culture. And I want to say that it is an incredibly empowering culture, and you get a lot of information, and it's an incredibly exhausting culture because we're very good at criticizing ourselves and criticizing you over there. It can be a little bit, you have to have pretty thick skin to be able to survive and feel like you're, doing well. I have to wake up and go, I can do this, sometimes because it's not a lot of celebration of how wonderful and great we are. It's it's always, but we could do better, which is inspiring, but it's also exhausting. So, I think that helps because it happens, like Brian's really hard on himself, and, like that just trickles down through the org. And so people on the team want to be transparent, and we encourage feedback in a lot of different ways to make our managers better, to make our processes better, to make our product better, to make the culture better. There's a lot of critique coming. It's not just one way. It's the team coming and telling me as well what they think we should do better, which is great. I love it. Yeah.
So obviously, it's a lot of everything happens on the level of the team. So how do you actually solve real people problems? So if is it something that gets down to the team? So are people expected to solve interpersonal problems while the process does not function really inside the team, or there's some other mechanism that you
all the teams have managers, and we want people to collaborate, and every case of something not working as intended has two sides to the story, and you got to get in there and listen to the different sides and look for patterns. I kind of look for patterns of behavior. Is this a pattern that this person doesn't listen to their peers, or is this a pattern that this person is not getting their specs done on time, or that kind of thing, versus a point in time, we work through it, we get through it. But we can all make mistakes, learn the lesson, drive yourself to be better, but then be better next time, so it's not a pattern. Yes. Oh, Jessica. Hi.
I'm so glad you showed this slide because our tools give us the ability to measure everything, but just because you can measure something, I like that you're pointing out that doesn't mean that those are the things you need to pay attention to. In that systems view, no individual can be responsible, right? It's a whole, it's everything. So when you start looking at individual measurements on this, you lose the picture of the system actually being able to.
Yep. Yes. So Jessica, who just joined our team a couple weeks ago, said, I have to repeat for the camera or for the recording, but said this is good to show that even though you can measure everything, how you can you shouldn't necessarily pay attention to every metric, and how it can have actual detrimental effects that make the team not come together as a team if you're so individually focused in metricing people. I think I got that. Okay, good.
Question?
Yes.
I'm on this side here. So a lot of the conversations around the changes in roles, I think the prominent ones are the developer's role. We heard that the guy or girl needs to be more involved with testing, with deployment, etc. It does sound like the developer's role has been expanded or expected way more than the different roles, for example, the ops role or even the QA teams.
Well, we don't have a QA team anymore, so they don't have a role. So you're right. The ops team is part of the dev team, and I think that team, as our team has grown and grown and grown, the ops team hasn't grown, and that's a goal because we want to have more of. It's a transition of moving the most ops functionality into the engineering discipline. And a lot of this talk has been about how the dev role has changed so much. And I want to say the PM role has changed a lot too. We didn't talk about that here because it's a little bit a different story. But basically, PMs have always been responsible for the why and the priorities and the design. But now we're responsible for what I call the full end-to-end funnel. So the why and the priorities and the design are kind of in the middle, but how do people learn about it, and how do they buy it, and what is the kind of acquisition experience? We were very much out of that. That was like, oh, those are UE people writing docs, and that's the marketing team coming up with the business model, and that's the marketing team doing the website and all that stuff. That was all someone else. Well, it still is those teams, but PM is ultimately accountable for that. And then the same at the bottom of the funnel, there's all this customer telemetry coming through, and we're responsible for making sure we input that into our backlog and thinking. So they kind of look at it like Satya describes PM as like mini CEOs is what he calls it. So I think it's brought accountability to both disciplines, both major disciplines at the company that has required quite a bit of growth and learning and challenge as part of that. Okay, so with all of those changes, this is why I say it was a journey, because, sure, we maybe went from 4 to 6 month milestones to 3 week sprints, and that only took us, a year or something like that, or maybe it took us a day to just call things sprints, depending on how you look at that. But then there was the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing that we kept working on, and it's a continual journey. And it's not over. The next things, there's things we just haven't solved very well yet. And we alluded to some of these as part of the individual sessions, but across the board, now that we're breaking out all these different microservices, we have 40 of them now. We have the TFS monolith service that we're breaking down as well. We're dealing with the sprawl and managing all these different things, and we're saying, okay, is containers going to help? How are we going to orchestrate all of these things and manage the dependencies between them? So there's a whole bunch of planning going underway that I hope we can get up here at some point and say, this is how we do microservices at scale, and we can kind of give you that talk at some point. Don't have it yet because we're not doing it super well yet. Also, we want to do even better at security and compliance. It's still a bit of a manual thing. We want to figure out how we can bake these things more into our workflow and our tool set. And then something near and dear to my heart, more customer focus. I feel like, especially when it comes to our docs, we're terrible. Our features get way ahead of our docs. PMs don't take a lot of accountability for the docs yet. And boy, that's a lot of times people's way of discovering our product through SEO or actually trying to use our product. We need to get all the stuff that like we're doing here now. This is an effort to document our knowledge and do a better job at that. And then the other key next step is, as I said to Clemens here, is that we've got the driving 1ES across Microsoft. Like, we need to actually not be the only people who adopt these practices and learn from these changes. And how can we get our tools, but more importantly, the way we work, changed across the company? We've driven. I've got the stats here right now. This is from May, I guess, but these are in thousands. So we have 40,000 engineers. There's 75,000 people, but 40,000 engineers at the company who use a piece of VSTS. Then you can see 34,000 are WIT and 32 are Git and blah, blah, blah. That's Visual Studio IDE with the ... So we've completed, we need to finish the rollout of these tools that can scale to large teams. It's not the whole company yet. And so that's kind of our wave 1 adoption. But also we need to figure out, I give this same sort of talk that, the condensed 1-hour version to a lot of teams at Microsoft, and saying it's not just about doing the same thing in a shorter period of time. It's about behaving differently, and the accountability and the autonomy and the, how to do that. So bringing the practices along and helping the company change. And, I tell you, the company, we're not so great about learning from our peers. It's not so great to have someone come and say, hey, I know how to do it. You want to learn from me? Yeah, that goes over like a lead balloon. So it's like, this is how we failed at it. You could learn from our failures, and that's working better. But we also do things like have 1ES day, and we train people and kind of stuff like that, which is an interesting aspect to our product team role. And then we have new problems. Like, we kind of tackled the core, but we have test tools for the company. The company does not use the test tools that we ship. Every major division has a different set of tools. It's a wreck. So we may have fixed it for ourselves. We need to fix it for the company. It needs to run at scale for people like Windows and Office. Security, compliance, accessibility, and social experiences are all on our wave 2 of experiences that we want to help the company get better at. So we have internal tools, cooking on all of those things. Social's more of an external tool that is going to apply both places easily. But our philosophy is, get it right internally, and then we ship it externally. So those are some things in incubation right now that we hope to be rolling out internally over the next 6 to 9 months.